I do, folks. How you doing? Just a quick one. Right, I thought we'd talk about a right. I thought we'd talk about a right to travel. A right to travel. There's lots of folk out there say that they can do it, or say that they know how to do it, or say that they are doing it, or whatever. I don't think there's lots of folks saying they are doing it. There's a few folks that say they are doing it. From what I gather, they all fail. But I'm more concerned about the fact of what happens. Now, what happens, in my opinion, somebody decides they've got the right to travel. They do whatever they believe that they need to do to not evidence that right to travel, but stand on that right. And then they start traveling. And then they make a YouTube video, and then later they get caught driving under the Road Traffic Act. Blah blah blah. Sometimes getting fraud and such like as one of the charges. Now, it's really serious, and there's a reason it's one of the Holy Grails, and there is a genuine reason it's one of the Holy Grails. They don't really like to allow it. So if you give them an out, they are taking that out, and they are going to screw you. And that's a fact. It's an absolute fact. They are going to screw you. Now, if you haven't done it correctly, and you take off your number plates and you put your own number plates on, you're still under the Road Traffic Act. That motor is contracted to hold a certain registration plate, and you are changing it for a different one to hide or conceal the identity of it. That's fraud. So that's why you're going to get done for fraud, basically, amongst other charges of not having insurance, and so on and so forth. So you're screwed. You're in an administrative process. Although administrative courts are unlawful, they are going to take you. You're going to have to deal with multifaceted then, aren't you? If you're going to start calling the courts out as unlawful, you're now fighting, are the courts unlawful? Have you got the right to travel? There's two fights going on, and any and such like else that you do, which makes it more complicated and more likely to lose if you don't know what you're doing. So, like I say, one of the Holy Grails, and that's the reason really why there aren't thousands of motors travelling around with their own number plates on and doing it lawfully without hinder. It's as simple as that. So beware. Now, I've been travelling under my rights to travel for quite some time, and I'm left alone. In fact, I've just had a copper behind me a little while ago. A traffic cop just happened to be behind on the road and turned off when he had to turn off. It's the way it is. When it's done correctly, you don't have those hassles. You're not hiding from police. You're not turning because you see a police car. Quick, go that way just in case. It's quite a relaxed affair because you know you're travelling lawfully. And I have mentioned it a few times, but I've never really gone into it because of that very fact. Many folks go out there, tell you how to travel under your rights to travel, and then put you out there making a hash of it. And people who want to do these processes or follow these processes through, they don't put any thought into the fact that before you can do this shit, you need years of knowledge built in there to be able to do it. Otherwise, you need a working process that's actually sat there for you, and they haven't been easy to come across, have they? Now, I know we do one in unchainedremedy.com, so feel free to go and look at it. It also tells you about it, tells you pretty much what you need to do. But I thought I'd just run through a few things, because there's some serious mistakes people make when they're travelling under the rights to travel, because it's not about I have the right so I'm going to do it. This world isn't about I've got the right so I'm going to do it. That's right and wrong. The world doesn't work under right and wrong. Administrative processes particularly work under wrong. So you kind of get where I'm going. You've got to do your own due diligence. You've got to correctly deal with your situation. Now, it's not just a case of DVLA. And people talk about deregistering the motors and such like. It's not about getting their confirmation. It's about setting it at law. You don't ever need their confirmation, because they're not going to give it, because if they gave it, there would be evidence in that they're breaking the law. You'd put it on the internet and everybody would do it, and that'd be it. Their game's over, isn't it? So this is why they'd rather go in acquiescence than answer the questions. And folks have got to realise that and realise what's going on. Acquiescence is full agreement with whatever you've said when used correctly. So use it correctly. You've put them under notice, you're asking questions to start off with, just asking questions, and then you're following through with opportunities to cures, get them to the default points. Now, you have your choice whether you run it through a court or not. I don't need to, because I can actually stand there and deal with it. And the way it is, it's got to such a length, I'm dealt with to such a degree, I don't believe there's any issues to be had. Although there's always the opportunity for tyranny. As I tell everybody, in this world you can never tell what something is going to happen. But what you've got to realise, the biggest part is discretion. Now, anybody who knows me knows I'm a quick traveller. I get about, but as I am now, I'm in traffic, I'm travelling really steady, I'm very, very discreet, I'm not drawing attention to myself. If I was in a country lane, there was nobody about at all, I'd probably be going for it a bit and enjoying my journey. It's pleasure as well as the fact I have to do it. So that's the fact of the facts. I'm making my own choices to what's safe. I am competent to make those choices, and here I am to evidence that I'm not smashing into folks left, right and centre, and I'm quite safe doing what I do. I've been doing it for an awful long time. So it's not about saying I can do this so that. You're travelling in traffic, you're travelling in towns, you're travelling up and down side streets or people's houses nearby. You're not careering past them, you're not pulling yourself into the public, you're sitting in the private. My plates are my own plates. They've been availed to everybody that needs them to be availed to, and for the most part, when you look at them, you would think it's a private plate, but you wouldn't think anything of it. It wouldn't draw your attention. Now, what you got to think, if you're going to draw your attention, and lots of people think that's clever, put private on it or something like that, but then you're going down the road and the police see the car and he sees that number plate and he goes, oh, what the hell's that? And he comes and has a look. He doesn't bother running it through to see if there's a do not detain on there. He just basically comes and pulls you because he sees something's dodgy here, and now you've pulled yourself back into the public. So this is the part of being discreet, this is the part of being private. It's not just a word to use, it's an actual fact. You're private. Now, I know I'm quite public about what I'm doing and what I do, but as I've said many times, I've gone through many stages with my affidavits, and I've evidenced to such a degree that I am going to speak because of. So I've got the right to speak. At law I have the right to speak, but still I'm not careful about what I speak about, but I know where the lines are. And there are lines. There's things I could come and talk about on here that YouTube would take down immediately, and some of the things I know about will probably get me shot. But the very fact that I don't come on here and just get stupid about things is the reason I'm still here. It's kind of feeling where the line is and hoping that you're right and you're always on the right side of that line. But the reality is, there's certain things that should be divulged, there's certain things that should be found by folks, and that finding, that journey of finding, is part of the comprehending of how to implement it and how to live with it at the end of the day. That's a big thing, because a lot of folks want to put their own private plates on the car and just do stupid things to it that's going to stand out and show that the police I can do what I want, but it's just pulling yourself into the public. So when you've dealt with it correctly, you've dealt with DVLA under notice, asking them right questions and assuming such and such. If the right questions are not answered, you can take them to the point. Then you deal with the Secretary of State for Transport, Grant Shapps, and you deal with your local police chief. You will be CCing the Cressida Dick, the police chief in, and possibly other MPs as well. I mean, you can get silly about it. I've noticed everybody you could imagine, literally everybody you could possibly imagine has been in connection with it's been noticed, but it's not really necessary, because you only have to do a couple, really. I mean, you could do the Attorney General, or you don't really have to. If you deal with the entire bottom end, you've dealt with it. But if you deal with the judiciary as well, you've actually covered yourself in any case for going forward. Secretary of State, I mean, if you read the inside of any passport, not that I use that as mine, because I'm my status is corrected, but if you do look at the inside of your passport, that tells you there you've got the right to travel. So you could use that if you've not corrected your status, or if you're not doing it as a corrected status, you could, in my opinion, you could run a case just purely on that, with nothing else and no other evidence but the passport. But you probably want to be experienced enough, because if you haven't covered all your bases, they will find an out. So basically, it is a case of covering all your bases and making sure you've done it really all the way down the line correctly, and you've not left anything open for them to come on. Like I say, your local police, really important, because if the police do anything to you, you've got it set at law with that police chief. If his data protection officer, which in a lot of cases the data protection officer steps in and writes instead of the police chief. Now normally I would send it back saying not interested in you blah blah blah, but a data protection officer is actually a barrister at law and a police constable. So to me, that's a golden opportunity. And some folks, if you don't want to mess with that, just stick with noticing the police chief and addressing the police chief and stating that you're not giving him any consent to share. But the reality is, once you get hold of a data protection officer that's a barrister at law and a police constable, you can play with them now. You absolutely, the only thing you want to be talking about right at the start is how they address you, and you get them addressing you correctly as a living sovereign, flesh and blood, or however you wish to be addressed, and they absolutely will, because they are a barrister at law and a police constable. Now that crossover, you don't come across it, and it'd be lovely if every policeman that you could come in contact with was actually a lawyer of some sort, or to a certain degree, because they know the law and they know when they're fucked. They know if you tell them you've got to address you a certain way, they've got to address you a certain way, so they will address you a certain way. You tell them to address you correctly, they're going to address you correctly, but then what they're going to do is play a little semantics in with it somewhere, maybe put some quotation marks in there or something, or slant it, italics it or something. They'll do something, pick on it immediately, send it back and tell them, you'll tell them one last time, this is exactly how you do it, no semantics, no italics, no other punctuations or further punctuations other than what's in there, and you will send it back to them again, and they will absolutely address you correctly the next time, and from that point on you will always be addressed correctly from the police. Now when you start getting paperwork and letters from the chief of police, barrister and the data protection officer of the shire of that police, there's no way in the world that any police at your window could ever say to you, that's not your name, or they're not accepting that name, because that is actually how the police address me. That is as simple as that. So there is no options on that. Now that takes everything out. They can't bring a case against that name, and so on and so forth. So there's many things to do and many tricks to pull along the way, but the most important thing is due diligence and actually following everything that you need to follow right the way through, and don't slack and don't think that you can be stupid about it. I have a notice in my window there telling them what's going to happen if there's any tickets or anything attached to it. Only one time did a ticket get put on it while I was in a car park, and the ticket man was walking away from the car. As I was walking up to it, he watched me just pull the ticket off. I walked over to the machine and just stuck it on the machine, and I walked away, and I watched him walk over to the machine, and then I think he was cancelling the ticket because he had read it. I presume that's what he was doing, but either way it don't matter, because nothing's coming back, is it? Because it's my own plate and it's not on anything of DVLA. They've got no rights whatsoever to hear my name, use my name, or hold any data of me. So that's where that goes. Whether they do or not, it's all right saying I've told them to get rid of all my data. You know damn well they're never going to get rid of your data, but if they ever did try to use it or share it, then you've got a claim on them, haven't you? So it is like that. It's about handling your own affairs, and that's the most important thing, because nobody's going to do it for you. You can't write to DVLA and say this is me now, and then expect them to tell the police and them to tell everybody else. As well as that, you've got an insurance matter to sort out. Now the insurance matter is very important. I think a lot of folks mix up right to travel with I don't have any liability. There's a huge difference in that. You, at all times when travelling under your right to travel, have your liability. It is you. You say that you're a man, you say that you have the right to handle your own affairs. Then when you're on the road, if you have a crash and it's your fault, you've got to handle them affairs. You've got to settle that. So it isn't about getting away with insurance. It's nothing to do with getting away with insurance. But the fact is, a living flesh and blood man cannot get insurance, and that should be part and parcel of what's in your notices, and that would be dealt with by way of Boris the Florist as First Lord to the Treasury, or whoever is First Lord to the Treasury officer incumbent moving forward when Boris has gone, because I'm sure they've already left staged Matt Hancock, so they'll be doing Boris the Florist very, very soon. They let them have the do the damage, move them on, and then everybody just moves on to the next puppet because they're stupid. They don't get that there's a bigger agenda at play, and everyone's one and the same. But hey, what can I say? You can't fix stupid. So that being aside, you're going to contact Boris the Florist if you've got out about you, and then you're going to put him under notice to settle any claims towards yourself under your Seska V. Now, if you don't know what you're playing with, don't even attempt it. It's as simple as that. There isn't a template for it. I won't give a template for it. It's too serious. When you start handling your affairs to this level, you absolutely need to know how to handle your affairs. So if you want to know the next stages of that, you've got to go a little bit further. You've got to learn, because ultimately you've got to deal with it. Like I say, we do a process, but with that comes us. So you can, and it is. So it's as simple as that. But the reality is, once you start messing about with actually accessing your Seska V, loads of people tell you that how they can or how they do and how they want to. That's the real way you would access it. You're not going to access it to get money. If you was going for money, you'd be going for a remedy against all the torts and trespasses against you, and having various things of your life remedied, as opposed to my right to travel. So the reality, it's a case of doing your own due diligence. You've got to think about how you are going to cover any liability that you would have. I travel under my liability bonds are created and are logged, and I have a TO number from the Treasury on those liability bonds. So the reality is, it's not just pieces of paper. Like I say, bonds, I can't just sell you a bond. I can't put a bond out to the public in open forum. Everybody would fuck it up, everybody would get into trouble, everybody would just start throwing it out there. You need to know some shit before you start playing with your Seska V to any degree. It is not what people say, it's not what people think. Now, loads of people on YouTubes and on Facebook will say, I'm going for my Seska V and Seska V and Seska V and Seska V, Seska V. Seska V, it is a fact. It's not the be all and end all of it. It's like the birth certificate. It's actually a part of the fact of life, but it is not what you're going for. It's not what you're dealing with. You're not dealing with your Seska V. You can access it at some points for some things, but you can have it made available for some things. You want to start getting money out of it, and let's face it, there's lots of folks out there, and I'm just going to bounce onto this one because it's really fucking important. There's lots of folk out there that have been chasing that for 20 years. There's lots of folk in it that have been in this game, that have been in there for 6 months saying that they're going for it. Think about that. Think about that, seriously. How do I access my Seska V? Do you think there's a million people running around accessing the Seska V? So do you think somebody on Facebook can tell you how to access your Seska V? So don't ask those daft questions. There's so day one questions that people need to get over. How do you handle your affairs is the question you should be asking, and that you should be asking it yourself and looking into it and seeing how you can be helping yourself and taking those stupid steps that aren't taken before you start trying to take the big steps. Because handling your affairs, you handle them from the bottom up, you don't handle them from the top down. So think about that when you're out there lone rangering There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and there's a lot of mistakes that anybody can make. So if anybody can make a mistake, what are you going to do as a really early stage first timer? So what you want to be doing is working on the smaller things if you're trying to do it yourself. Work on the innocuous things that aren't going to bite you in the ass, and get the confidence and get some wins under your belt before you start trying to do the absolutely humongous things that only those at the cutting edge of what they do can do. And this is a huge waste of time for so many folks that are trying to learn things, trying to learn and trying to fight way, way, way above the weight. Learning is a progression, absolutely. You don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to learn to be a scientist, give me a degree level piece of paper to learn from. You're just going to look at it with your eyes crossed. And it's the same with this shit. Learning degrees, fight at your weight or just above your weight, because then you can get some advice, and it's advice then, not doing it for you, because every time you get somebody to do it for you, you haven't actually learned. So this is something really important. If your goal is to do the step by step, I'm going to learn everything, I'm going to do everything myself, this is what you've really got to consider. You're going to waste all of your time if you're only going for the holy grails. In absolute, the only way you can go for holy grails as a novice is walk through it, and nobody's got the time to walk everybody individually through it. It's impossible. And there's very, 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 very few folks that can actually travel under the rights to travel, including most of those that call themselves aviators, most of those I call aviators. Some have chosen to leave it alone because it's just not worth the hassle to them, but to me, I would say that's because they never realised the right way to do it, because it's not hassle, it's just due diligence. There is a bit involved, but at no point are you coming across any battles. You're just setting things in stone, and by the time you've demanded probably 3 or 4 times that all records are altered on the national database, and you've told the chief of police what's going to be happening to him if you're interfered with by any of his or anybody under his liability, and you've also told him under notice to agent, notice to principal, to ensure that the entirety of the country know this, and now that's all his liability, and he's your trustee. You've appointed him trustee in this matter. There's many things you can do. Sometimes they'll differ person to person. There's one for people to jump up and down on, but yeah, sometimes things differ. It depends on when you're writing, how you're writing. It doesn't really matter semantics. Like I say, what really matters is all the points are hit. That's the only thing that matters. All the points are hit, and you've got all your rights and all the reasons for your rights all set in stone, and every angle is covered as far as the principles that deal with it, or the principles in the United Kingdom Corporation and their agents thereof. So yeah, there's a little something on the right to travel, and only when you've done it right will you be able to do it right. And it's as simple as that. Loads of folks might be driving around with no tax insurance and just saying that they're travelling under the rights to travel, and then when it hits, they'll actually find out, well, they won't believe that they weren't, because I've had many conversations that they will not believe that in fact at law there was driving under the Road Traffic Act and committing crimes or offences under the contract that you'd agreed to, which is the driving licence. Many things that have to be dealt with, many things. So folks, if you don't do it right, it ain't going to work, and the testimony to that isn't me. That's the very fact that you don't all know somebody doing it. Well, I suppose you do all know somebody doing it. Me. But and it's not a bragging thing, it's a due diligence thing. And I say that I know of one other that's doing it fully and correctly, a very good friend of mine, and one other very good friend of mine that's about to start doing it correctly. And other than that, I don't know anybody that's done the whole thing correctly and is doing it and getting away without any hassle. Now, I know there's folks that claim they're doing it and then they have their motors took off them. I don't necessarily hold much weight to that, and I wouldn't call them for it, because that rolls into that shit can happen in this tyrannous world. That could be as simple as a copper just saw, decided to pull, didn't do a check, and then you're dealing with the ego of a copper at the side of the road. That can happen. What determines it is where it goes from here and what's the outcome at the end. That's what I can say, because tyranny can hit at any time in this world. It really can. It's how we deal with that as men and women that matter, and it's how we deal with that which ensures that we don't get bothered again. That's the top and bottom of that, in my opinion. If somebody has had the motor took off them that are doing this, and then they fought for it back, they nailed the police chief for theft, they nailed the company for theft that actually carried it away, they got the motor back, they got a shed load of compensation, I guarantee you they would never be bothered again. That's their rights to travel set in stone forever. And that is a fact. That's an absolute fact. And unfortunately, that's where we are in this world. I haven't had to go that far, but in all honesty, I've served going towards now 200 affidavits. I think the exact number at last count was 185 affidavits of truth on the government and judiciary. So my obsession continues. But what can I do? I have the ability, so I do. So they just keep going. So that's where we're at now. So I should imagine that's why I'm pretty much left alone, because what the fuck would they want me in their courts for? What the fuck would they want me... could you imagine if they put me in prison? I'd be firing habeas corpus off to everybody that's on remand. I'll be putting void orders in for everybody that's there on a administration process. So yeah, I really cannot. I just envision it now. They're gonna lock me up in a straitjacket, aren't they, with a gag? Probably in the Tower of London. But hey, what can I do? But yeah, I should imagine, in all honesty, that's why I just don't get bothered, because I should imagine everybody's saying, I'm just not gonna bother with him, let's just leave him alone, let that one go. Not interesting. Yeah, it's not gonna get anybody anyway. And that's where folks should get to, in all honesty, and not by serving 185 affidavits of truth. Just by serving the correct ones in the first place. Like I say, this is my own obsession. It is my own obsession. Something's wrong, I'm going to serve an affidavit of truth to the right entity, and I've got something on everything. But like I say, my personal journey, my own journey. You have your journey. Don't get wrapped up and embroiled in my journey. You can handle your own affairs without getting obsessed with it. Like I say, it's a form of OCD. It must be. And yeah, because before I know it, I wake up one day and last night, through the night, I wrote a notice. So now it has to be served. If it's been written and it's good, it has to be served. So that's just where it goes. So with you guys, just the things that are important, and especially at the early stages, just remember, don't try and run before you can walk. You can't just jump on a tightrope and walk it. You've got to be held up there the first few times, whether there's a safety line or you've got somebody either side of you on a low line. You've got to be guided through the things like that, or you've got to know your shit, and knowing your shit is all important. It really is. Once you know your shit, you can just handle your own affairs. It's done. So do that. If you thinking of travelling under your rights to travel, consider the things I've said, because it is so important. And the last thing I want is to hear of folks, and not just because they're asking me for help, I don't want to see folks getting into the shit like that, especially folks who aren't ready for it and just decide, yeah, I've been doing this 6 months now, I know that's wrong, so I'm going to do this. That's madness. That's madness. It's just causing trouble. It takes you into trouble. And I know most YouTubers are saying to you, do it, do it, do it. Now ask yourself why. I'll tell you, don't do it until you can do it. And when you can do it, if you want to do it, then do it. That's my best advice. If you're going to go it alone, careful. It isn't about asking somebody, how do I do this, and then just firing it off. It's serious. It's really serious. So you need to know what you're doing. Learn a little bit, unless you're having it done for you, and then see us on unchainedremedy.com, where you do actually have our advice. Not legal advice, factual advice on my own intellectual property and my own experiences. We don't do legal advice, and that's not a get out. I cringe when I hear the word legal, and I hear it so much, and I shouldn't, but I do cringe every time I hear it. It's just the blanket that covers the law. Stand lawfully, learn your rights, assert your rights, live by your rights, but do it correctly. And if tyranny ensues, don't cry about it, deal with it, handle your affairs, bring them fuckers to task. That's how you deal with it, bring them to task. On that note, I'm going to leave it with you, and there's your rights to travel. Be careful. See you later all. I accept no liability.